Welcome back. As I noted, I'm so excited for this next panel that we have. We have some top experts who I'll be bringing one by one to the stage. So first we have Ellen Lee joining us from Ford. Ellen, you can please turn on your camera and mic once you have that. We're bringing up Kathleen Chow. Kathleen, please turn on your camera and your mic as well. We welcome back to the people stage Joy Gockel. Joy, please turn your camera and mic on, as well as the one and only Kat Erment. Kat, please turn your camera and mic on. And one of our panelists, Ann Pauley, is having just a little bit of technical trouble getting to the stage. So we'll bring her to the stage as soon as the technical fates are on our side. But ladies, I welcome you to your career forum panel. And with all that, I'm going to sit back and see what you have to say. I can't wait to hear it. The stage is yours.
Well, thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here. My name is Ellen Lee. I'm from Ford Motor Company. But today for this panel, I'm really excited to be representing SME's additive manufacturing technical community of advisors. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our group, our role is to represent the voice of the additive manufacturing industry, to connect SME members to the larger additive manufacturing community, to address gaps, to understand, build awareness, and to really spread the use of additive manufacturing across industry verticals. And then importantly, to provide a resource for learning and workforce development for additive manufacturing. So one of our initiatives that Jennifer Coyne from the Barnes Global Advisors Group and I have been championing for the last year is this Career Forum panel. So it's really my pleasure to serve as the moderator for the panel here and to be joined by these great panelists that we have today. So each of these panels, we focus around a specific theme for our audience. And today we're trying to address how to build the next generation additive manufacturing workforce, really to provide insight to those who are earlier in their careers or newly transitioning to additive manufacturing. So in a moment, I'm going to pass it on to each of the panelists to introduce themselves. And I would love for each of you to take a minute or two to tell us about your current role in additive manufacturing, how you first got into additive, and then something that you wish you knew when you were first getting started. So I'm just going to go alphabetically. So Kathleen, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. I'm really happy to be part of this panel, and it's just such a great experience to be part of TIPE. I know that there's so many people who attend and are speakers, so it's really great to be contributing. So my name is Kathleen Chow. I'm currently a rotational additive manufacturing engineer at Eaton Corporation. We're a large power management company, but I'm part of our Additive Manufacturing Center of Excellence, which is a corporate research function, really to drive the adoption of additive across all of our business units. And we have a ton of different metal and polymer printers that we're using all the time. So we do a couple of things where we're vetting the technology, trying to apply it to new application spaces, and then also acting as an internal service bureau for people who actually want parts printed within our product teams. So how I got my start in additive, I'm actually fairly new to the additive industry. I have a long history from the materials side of the house, where I was a materials engineer in the aerospace industry at Boeing for, but then went to grad school, also in materials and metallurgy, and then just started in additive about a year and a half ago as part of this rotational program. I think the thing that I wish I would have known earlier about additive is that there are just so many flavors of additive and 3D printing that I had no idea. I think most people think about just like the filament type printing, especially when you're first getting new to the industry. But I've seen this pie chart a couple of times that just shows like all these different sections of, printing with filament, printing with powder, printing with resins, and then you get all these different combinations like tapes and slurries and all these things. So there's a lot of nuance to the industry, and it's definitely just a challenge to stay on top of things.
Great, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll get into some of those details for those who are just learning and trying to get up to speed on additive. So let's go to our next panelist. Let's go to you, Kat.
Hi, thanks, Ellen. My name is Kat Ermont. I'm the lead prototype technician at Peloton, which acts as an internal service bureau as well for product development. I got into AM while I was pursuing my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in sculpture, and it was just an elective that I took because I liked the professor, and I never thought that it would just fall in so naturally. So we stuck with that, and yeah, it's become basically my entire life since then. I I would say that the first thing that kind of surprised me early on was how much of a community there was for learning. And so that's where I got a lot of my education. If I could have gone back and told myself that I could become a professional additive manufacturing engineer without an engineering degree, that would have been my advice to myself.
That's great. Moving down the list alphabetically, let's go to you next, Joy.
Hello. So I'm Joy Gokul. I'm an associate professor at Colorado School of Mines, and I'm also the executive director of the ADAPT Center, which is our additive manufacturing research center and industry consortium at Mines. So I first got into additive when I was in my undergraduate, and this was before the prevalence of material extrusion printers. I'd like to think I'm not that old either, so it hasn't been that long ago. And so I actually got my start in metal additive. So there was a professor that I enjoyed classes, and he was a mentor for me and had a project opportunity for research. And I thought it sounded really cool using lasers to build material. And that is what really got me started in additive. A skill that I wish that I had known when I first started working in additive really centers around data. So being able to analyze and interpret data is something that I'm still improving on. I've always been great at collecting lots of data, but having those interdisciplinary skills to be able to analyze and interpret and learn these new techniques is something I wish I had spent more time on.
Great. And thank you. I'm glad you're able to join us and navigate those technical challenges. Anne, would you like to unmute and give us a little bit of information about you?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Anne. I'm a technical program manager at Google on the Pixel operations team. So I got into 3D printing when I was an undergrad in college studying mechanical engineering. And I just got, in my opinion, really lucky that I just happened to be there right when desktop extrusion printing was kind of really coming into existence. When I started college, the campus makerspace had 2 MakerBot Thingamatics. That was it. That was what we had. Everyone had to share them. And then kind of while things were progressing at the same time, I was also progressing through undergrad. And then about halfway through undergrad, we got our first Stratasys printer on campus in the shop. And so we started to be able to print teeny tiny little things. It was an exciting thing when we were able to print a part for class. And they would let us print something up to 2 inches or something like that, since we all had to share the same printers. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then how I got into the industry is when I got to the point where I was transitioning into grad school. I had already started like building open source printers, but then I was also really kind of really good at mechanical design, and so I wanted to do more with robotics. And then when I went for my master's, I kind of made my own curriculum of like person that wants to build robots, and it took controls classes and mechatronics. And then because Penn State has a lot of additive resources, and at the time was just starting to build out their additive master's program curriculum. at the tail end of my master's program, I was able to start taking some of those master's level additive manufacturing classes. So I had a kind of make your own curriculum of robotics and additive manufacturing all lumped together. And you don't usually build a robot by yourself, you build it with a team. And so I was able to try a lot of different aspects of it and really gravitated towards the mechanical design side of it. And not just the mechanical design side of it, but more the product design focused side of things. And so I kind of, after I finished my master's, I went into product development, hardware development, doing consulting work at a manufacturing company here in the Bay Area. And so I kind of built up that experience being a product design engineer. But at the same time, because the company that I was working for had a huge additive focus, I was able to also do additive applications in parallel with developing those product design skills.
Great, thank you. If some of you had joined Rashmi's talk right before this session, it was awesome, and she gave a lot of advice about how to really elevate your career as a technical person. I noted a lot of her advice, though, really applies to non-technical roles as well. And I know that many of the panelists here do have technical background. Kat, I know that you talked about having a background in fine arts. And, many times when we're looking to kind of start with a clean sheet and do design, and we need to think about just how to make that function. It's a very different case compared to when we're kind of designing something for additive that has already been designed for another process. Can you tell us a little bit about how your background in fine arts is helpful in that regard, or in other areas of additive manufacturing?
Absolutely. I noticed early on that I've always been in creative stuff. My dad and I used to help. I used to help with renovations around the house when I was younger, and I was kind of always hands-on. But I was pursuing graphic design for a long time, and I found that to be challenging in a way that wasn't really scratching an itch for me. So when I found CAD, I was like, oh, this is kind of like building with my hands, but with an undo button, the way graphic design has. And I was able to combine two processes that felt like really natural for me. So combining the 3D thinking with the 2D tools started to kind of mesh really well with like DFAM, design for additive. Like, how do I get something out of a computer and into my hand? Well, I have to think about gravity. I have to think about the forces that will be applied to it. And those are things that I already knew because I had to take a woodworking class and learn about like grain direction, which turns out is the same as like isotropic and anisotropic printing processes. It's all about like where the strains are. And there's a lot of transferable skills from just working with materials and three-dimensional objects in general. But then having the ability to then do it through CAD was kind of the key. And whenever I meet somebody who is in the art world and wants to get into additive, I just say the first step is CAD because you've got everything else.
Great, thank you. So you said something that kind of keyed in, like struck a chord with me in materials. My background is in materials, and I'm pretty old, so I didn't start out with additive manufacturing either. And I note that Kathleen, you have a very deep knowledge of metallurgy, and you had let us know that you didn't start out, you're relatively new to additive as well. So as someone who's new to this space, but with deep knowledge in some other areas, what resources did you find were the most helpful to get up to speed on the additive manufacturing technologies? And where could you apply your knowledge from other areas?
Yeah, I think that at least from materials going over to additive, there's a lot of overlap. As a lot of people listening in know, materials are a core piece of additive. For me, I think that there are a lot of resources out there that I tried to tap into to just get up to speed on the industry itself. Just thinking off the top of my head, there's a lot of really good free courses that you can take even through like things like Coursera or like LinkedIn that are great intros to just get a foundation on what's going on with the technology, what the hardware looks like, all that kind of stuff. I think another way that I tried to continue to actually learn about the industry is really starting to read and keep on top of like some of the media around additive. There's some really good websites that are always giving either like overview kind of articles of different technologies or really trying to stay on top of like what are the latest and greatest updates, because there's always so much new stuff happening in additive that it can be a lot of work just to even pay attention to what's the latest and greatest out there. I think that, taking all that and then being able to apply it back to, okay, what do I know? What's my background coming from materials, and then seeing how it was applied to new areas, that made that transition a little bit easier. And so I think if you're coming into the industry, one, just trying to take advantage of what kind of resources are out there, and then trying to then fit, that can help a lot with them trying to really understand this new industry and link it back to knowledge that you already have.
Great, thank you. So, and if anyone wants to chime in, I noted that Kat also put in the chat a couple of things, but anyone else on the panel have their favorite that they want to recommend that hasn't been mentioned?
Something that I learned recently that I wish I had more time for is to audit classes at your local college. There's no real downside to the fact that a professor is already teaching the class, just because I've had professors that were like, yeah, if I'm not grading you, then there's no added work on my curriculum. You can just sit in and watch this lessons, and then if you engage with the class, then you're helping other students anyway. So auditing classes was recommended to me.
Joy, is this something that you recommend as someone from academia and understanding, prior to being at Mines, I think you understand really well what the needs are from people from industry. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think it definitely could make sense both from the learning and the teaching perspective. So there are also things that if you're already in the additive community and you have advice to give, we like to incorporate a lot of guest lectures into our courses because we can't teach everything. We can't teach every perspective. So that's something that is a way to get involved also.
Yeah, that's great. So can you expand a little bit more on, how your career path from industry to academia has kind of influenced you and helped guide your career in additive manufacturing?
Yeah. So I went all the way through my PhD in additive doing research, and it was really kind of an exciting timeline. So I was about midway through my PhD when I would say, especially in the metals additive regime, everything kind of took off. You were starting to hear about applications coming out of industry and it being used in really awesome places. So I had the opportunity to work at GE Aviation after my PhD. I actually wasn't there for very long. Really, the fundamental whys behind things is where I love to sit, and so that led me back to academia. But I think getting the industry perspective and really seeing what's required for a technology to get to an application was really, really critical, and it helped inspire my kind of initial research as well as how I approached the scientific side of additive. So I kind of learned the industry speak and learned how to talk to industry. And so now, it's been a while since I worked in industry. So have to make sure that I keep that knowledge and keep interacting with people and talking with people about what the challenges are. So I think it's a skill that everyone can get, when you're in whatever your career path is. Just having conversations with other groups and understanding other perspectives, understanding the needs in different areas of the industry is one way to grow your career, staying in one position.
I love that point of view where you experienced something and it really taught you about yourself, that you were really interested in digging in and finding out, what the mechanisms of, things that are happening are, which led you to your next step. I love the advice of really continuing the conversation with colleagues in your network to understand what the big problems are, to see where you can provide, input. As somebody from industry who does have a background in the technical side, and we do a lot of collaborative work with other research labs and universities, that often I find myself kind of pushing back and saying, myself, I love to dig in and understand all the nitty-gritty details, but I know that we don't necessarily need that for making something work in industry. And so having the deep discussions about what it is we really need, what's good enough for certain applications, is really important to understand those diverse points of view. So let's go to you next, Anne. I know that you described having so many different roles within additive manufacturing. Can you tell us a little bit about how each role differed in its use of additive manufacturing and kind of what you learned from each of those?
Yeah, it differed dramatically between different places I've worked and different projects I've worked on. So I spent about 2.5 years in consulting. And so when you're in consulting, especially in product development, you're working on several projects in parallel, and they can be wildly different from each other. So there were points where at the same time I was working on a consumer product, like testing equipment for vehicle manufacturers, and like 3D printed lattices for different companies all at the same time. And so in projects that I was working on at the same time, additive was used very differently. In product development, we used additive to make most of our prototypes. So everything from checking industrial design aspects, to doing assembly testing, to doing process testing, just everything ended up being 3D printed because it was the fastest way that we could get parts to test our ideas. In a lot of the companies that we worked with that were larger manufacturers, some of the types of projects that we worked on was more fixture design. So because we had a lot of on-site additive resources at our company, we were able to turn around parts for these big companies much faster than most other product development and hardware development groups. So things like QA testing equipment for consumer electronics companies, and like panel alignment testing for vehicle manufacturers, and like LiDAR testing rigs, all kinds of stuff. We worked on such a crazy variety of things, and used 3D printing to make these like one-off assemblies that it just doesn't make sense to make tooling for if you're making just a couple of them. And kind of on the additive side, because again, we had a lot of on-site additive manufacturing resources, we were able to work on some really unique projects that were very, very much additive applications. So we worked with some different companies on optimizing some lattice structures for mechanical impact response, and like worked on oh man, what else did we work on? just like looking at different materials, what would work best for different applications. We did a lot of full color 3D printing, which is a whole world in itself. You know, making files for a 3D printer in Photoshop was something I didn't know existed until I like had access to a full color PolyJet printer. And as far as kind of the different industries I was able to work in, consulting obviously worked across many different industries. But then after consulting, I transitioned to working at a biotech company where I was kind of a mashup of a product design engineer and a PM. So in that world, a lot of the materials we were working with were really specific materials that had to be chemical resistant. And so that actually creates a lot of challenges with prototyping. And so a lot of it was like figuring out what materials in 3D printing we could actually use for these applications. Because when we were working with chemicals, we can't prototype something in ABS; it would have dissolved. And so we had to be very careful about which materials we selected for prototyping, and kind of know what the differences were between that material that was used in the prototype and what the end use material was. So a lot of polypropylene parts in biotech, but it's something that is not really compatible with 3D printing, at least not creating watertight parts out of polypropylene. And so a lot of times we use nylon as an equivalent, which doesn't have the same material properties. But in a lot of cases, if we had a good understanding of what the differences were, then we could use one to prototype the other. And now, having transitioned more into consumer electronics full time, I use 3D printing a lot for also somewhat different applications. There's kind of all the regular product prototyping, but now I'm more focused on process development. Since I'm no longer a product design engineer, I'm really focused on that scalability of the product. And so in addition to just the prototyping, we use 3D printing to do mock assembly tests. So how would this work on a production manufacturing line? Let's mock that up. Let's see how it works, because we do not want to design something and then just try to figure it out later, how to assemble it and what the problems will be. We want to know as soon as possible. And then also doing manufacturing process development. So if we're focused on some kind of camera guided assembly process, or some kind of, camera guided or dispense process, we need to do lots and lots of testing on that and really, really refine that assembly design and refine our process. And so we end up printing lots and lots of parts in order to test these processes over and over again.
Great, thank you. A lot of the challenges that you talked about really spoke to me. I feel your pain in a lot of those areas. At Ford, there are a lot of use cases for additive, and you need to look at a different material or a different process to address the needs of each of these use cases. And but for scaling to production scenarios, that's a very different question as well. And we need to really think about, how do we do that with additive when we are used to, at least in the manufacturing industry, looking at mass production processes that use a tool, right? And I think that the role that I have is quite similar to what Kathleen, you have right now at Eaton. And I know that you mentioned that you're part of a rotational program. So can you tell us a little bit about how a program such as the one that you're in can help you learn different skills, so that you can be prepared for whatever additive will ask of you?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm currently in a rotational program, and I know that there are a lot of rotational programs out there at a lot of companies. The particular one that I'm in is like an engineering sort of product design focused one, and it's not only additive, but it just so happens that I was able to do both my rotations in additive types of roles. So the program that I'm in is 2 years overall, 1 year rotation. So I'll do 2 of each. I'm on my second one right now. And I think there's a lot of benefits to doing rotation-like programs, particularly just being able to do a lot of different things and learn a lot of different skills, meet a lot of different people in a really short time. So for example, like I said, I come from a materials background, really didn't have any experience in additive, but my first rotation was really centered around like kind of parameter development for metal additive machines, somewhat leveraging some of my background, much more R&D, I would say. And so that was like a good way to kind of get into things that I knew and then bridging it into the industry. Whereas it's been really different with my second rotation, where now the role that I'm in is much more focused on like adoption of additive technologies, where we're not necessarily like developing all the time, but we're really looking at how do we apply these kinds of technologies to our products. So now I'm talking with like our product teams, supply chain people. Honestly, it took a long time for me to just figure out polymer printing because I'm a metallurgist by training. So even that was like a whole new world that I had to figure out. It took me a really long time to figure out what like ABS versus like PLA was at all. So I think with rotation programs, they really allow you to see a lot quickly. They certainly can push you out of your comfort zone, which can be a little intimidating, but also I think is a great way to actually learn very fast. And I think, Anne, you were sort of talking about how you've done a lot of different experiences over your career so far. I think even if you're not able to join a rotation program like this, there's also a lot of advantages to being able to just like sort of build your own rotations, aka try to seek out roles that are different and diverse as you move through your career and really give you different perspectives, meet different people, different views on the technology. So there's a lot of benefits to doing rotations and sort of making your own rotations, however you see your career.
Yeah, I think just getting a diverse view, because additive can apply to so many different use cases or instances. It's good to understand those different points of view and needs from different industries and people. So let's go to you, Kat. So you talked about your background in art and how it's helpful for design of AM for technical applications. But can you talk a little bit about how additive is used in the art world?
Yeah, I'm not too tapped into the big name artists because when I was in art school, I've kind of decided that I wasn't going to become an artist. I was just going to use the skills that I was learning to take that with me. But now, as my worlds are colliding and I'm seeing the additive world pop up in the art world, I'm seeing which artists are using it how. And something that I really like is rather than creating beautiful sculptures in CAD and then printing them out and placing them on a pedestal, I'm seeing a lot of artists use it as process, using additive as a replacing of material that you can't quite form using molds. So the same way manufacturing will 3D print metal parts that can't be, milled or turned turned into whatever shape it is, artists are using it the same exact way to create, inorganic but hands-off kind of work. So combining materials, creating armatures that are very specific, and yeah, just like really pushing it as a material versus a content. And I think that that's the difference. When I was in art school, a lot of the conversation was about what story are you telling? What do you want your viewers to feel when they look at your art? And that never really resonated with me. I was more interested in, oh, I wonder how they built that. And how that's assembled and how are they able to trick us into believing that it's a material that it's not. That's the stuff that I was really fascinated with, and I think that's where additive becomes really powerful, being able to do something that pushes boundaries of traditional manufacturing while also subverting expectations about what materials and art can look like. And I think that's kind of where the art world is heading, because I think that we've all seen and been admiring the same types of wow pieces. Not to say that they're not interesting and something new is always popping up, but taking the art world back into its making origins and its crafting origins and the history of making as craftsmen, essentially craftswomen, and being able to use additive as a tool, like Rashmi was saying. Like, it is a tool in the toolbox. It is a skill that you acquire, and it's not magic, and neither is art.
I love that point of view. And I think what you said about using it as a tool in the toolbox and really using it to express yourself as opposed to just making that wow thing applies almost everywhere. Like when we first started talking about additive manufacturing at Ford, everybody wanted to print everything. And it was almost backwards in that the experts in additive had to keep pushing back and saying, no, we're not going to do that with additive, because even though you can do it, sometimes you shouldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
So it, as you and Rashmi both said, it's a tool in the toolbox, and if it's the right tool, you should use it.
Definitely.
So thanks for that point of view. Joy, let's go back to you. As we've been talking, we have talked about different use cases, and you yourself mentioned about how much additive has evolved over the time that you first got involved in it. Are there any particular trends or emerging areas that you think that we as an industry should be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, I think in additive, it's going to be how additive fits with other things. So kind of this idea around convergent manufacturing is something that you hear, which is like multi-process, multi-material, things that are enabled by additive technology to create additional functionality. I think a lot of the initial applications with additive really were great because of complexity and design from a geometric perspective. But now we're looking at how can we change material, how can we change and use multiple processes together to really increase the functionality. So I think that's an area that we'll see advancement in, but we'll have to be very intentional to make sure the business case is there, and you're not just making processes for processes' sake and materials for materials' sake. It's really getting the whole community together, but increasing functionality in more ways than just design.
Love it, 100%. I totally agree. I'm seeing the same thing. So I have one more question, proper question before going through a round robin. And then I'd love to, if we have time, address some of the questions that have been posted in the Q&A. But so Anne, I wanted to ask you, how do you use your network to help you, and how have you used it to help you transition from one role or one career to another? Can you give us some advice there?
Yeah. So one of my jobs, I did not even apply for. A friend of mine who I'd worked with in the past was leading a 3D printing shop at Meta, which mainly was working on VR headsets, and so this person just directly reached out to me when they had an opening and said, hey, I know that you really like additive, you're great at CAD, like please interview for this. And so that's how I ended up in that role. Some of my other roles, I was reached out to by recruiters, including the one that I have now. But if someone is reaching out to me, that's because they found my presence online somewhere, and was use that to determine that I was a good fit for the team that they were recruiting for. And so I think having that network, even if it's not a direct person-to-person connection that's getting you that role. Just having that online presence, it kind of proves that you're not just looking for that job for the paycheck. You're actually really, really involved in the industry. You're really interested in the field, and I think that says a lot when you are talking with different companies.
I totally agree. And I think Women in 3D Printing provides such a great resource to do that networking, as well as other social media and other groups. So can't recommend, agree with what you said more. And, when I myself have been looking for a candidate to fill a position, whenever someone submits their resume, the first thing I do is I kind of look to see if they have some online presence, to see if they've been involved in some of these areas. So it's a great piece of advice. We are running out of time on this panel, but I did want to ask each of you, what is one thing you can recommend that somebody can do today if they're interested in getting started with additive manufacturing? And let's start with you, Kathleen.
Yeah, sure. I recently did this because I just started, I guess, an additive not too long ago. But I think if I were to say something, I would say try to get hands-on on some kind of printer. And I know that that can be harder than it sounds, but even if that is like the resources that you have at your school or university, going to like a maker space and using one of their polymer filament printers. I think some libraries even have something sometimes. I think just being able to like start to experiment with the technology and get a feel for what that even is like is really, really helpful. And I think that starts to open up a lot more questions and like curiosity about the technology. So I would say if you can try to get access to some kind of printer and mess around with it, I would do that.
That's awesome. How about you, Joy?
So mine would be get connected with people. People have played a big role throughout my career, and learning about different things has really been through conversations with experts in those areas. So, one way is Women in 3D Printing. Go find your local chapter, go to an event, start talking to people. And I think that'll really open up a lot of doors.
Awesome. Anne?
Oh man, those are my first two choices. Get hands-on experience and try to meet people who are working on additive and are either in the industry or just very involved in it. Let's see. One thing I'll add is just observe the different industry trends that are happening. Follow even at a very high level what's happening with materials and what's happening with process. Like what new companies are coming into the field, and you can gain a lot of insight there about like where the most interest in additive manufacturing is coming from, whether it be different processes or different industries.
Awesome. And Kat, finish us off here. It's
hard to follow all that when those are basically all of my answers too. But I guess to add on to that, it's a little bit like what Kathleen was saying about getting your hands on something. A lot of those maker spaces are volunteer run. So instead of, being a member of them, you can even just volunteer at them, get some operational experience, some admin experience, and then that'll start teaching you a little bit of the skills that you might need for an entry-level job. And a lot of the entry-level jobs that you could get as a technician is support removal and cleaning the plates and things that are really, like low bar of entry for skills, but also you're not going to get through the door without those skills on your resume. So the volunteer experience does actually help towards that, getting something down just so that you can go and get some hands-on experience in front of other users. So then that visibility in the network begins to grow. But my number one answer is Women in 3D Printing.
I think all of us have that high on the list, right? And if you're here today, I think you've already figured out that that's a great resource.
It is, and now I'm invading.
So I would just add, if you're a student, getting involved in a mentorship program, like finding a mentor, not necessarily even somebody who's involved in additive, but just to get some information about industry, that will really help guide what types of opportunities are available, help you learn more about what it is that you like and don't like. And hopefully, because there's so many different roles in additive, it can help narrow down which area to focus on to kind of make your first step.
That was a wonderful way to wrap up, Ellen. And thank you, Ellen and Kat, Joy, and Kathleen. I loved this. It breaks my heart that now I have to kick you off stage. If I had Oscar's music queued up right now, which I usually do at TIPE, I would be playing you off much more gracefully, but instead I'll just pop up like this and say that this was fantastic. I loved it, and I know I'm not alone in that. But all good things must come to an end, including this panel, which is also the last panel in the people track for TIPE 2023. And I thank you all for being a part of it.